Here's what's coming up on episode 95 of the Big Seance podcast. Crystal Hope Reed.
I started looking on Amazon for books from the perspective of a person living with a psychic. There are, like you said, there's a ton of books out there about how to be psychic or from the psychic's perspective. But I found that there was actually no book on the topic of, well, okay, when your partner is seeming crazy to the rest of the world, how do you hold your life together? How do you make the best of it? And then I realized, well, I'm actually, with my counseling background and going through this personally, I'm sort of uniquely positioned to write a book on this subject. The partner has to understand this is part of their life now. I mean, if you're in this partnership, this is part of your life, even if you're not into it. And you probably see that at your house too, right?
I have some experience being the offender.
Sure, yeah.
In your book, you say the new standard is to incorporate metaphysical work into an otherwise normal life.
And what do you think about that? I mean, that's obviously my opinion, but does that make sense to you?
I would relate it to what I'm doing now as a podcast nerd, you know?
Yes.
Although in your case, you have had somebody reach out and grab you.
I did, yeah. I mean, we're trying to tell people they shouldn't be scared, right?
Perfect timing!
Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance.
Hey Patrick, this is Amber Choicella calling from Sacramento, California. It's been a long time me saying that I'm going to call and leave you some feedback, but here I am. I absolutely love your show. I've been listening for over a year. I'm all the way caught up on all your shows. The content is just amazing. Your personality fits in it so well. I hope that one day I can be interviewed by you. That's in the works. But I love you, Patrick, and keep doing what you're doing. Just keep doing it. The world needs you. All right. Bye.
I'm jumping right in today, so hold on. I so very enjoyed my conversation with Crystal Hope Reed, who happens to be an animal communicator, but she's also the author of a fascinating book, which we decided to stick to in this interview. This book isn't like any of the others, trust me. It's called How to Live with a Psychic, your guide for maintaining a happy relationship when someone you love gets weird. Right after the interview, Tim Prossel will present his very last Spectral edition here on the Big Seance podcast, and I'm definitely going to miss it. I'll have more on that later in the show. And I'll also have some listener feedback before blowing out the candles. Here we go. Crystal Hope Reed has a master's degree in counseling psychology and has spent most of her professional life in the fields of counseling, mental health, and education. She's worked with clients as diverse as gifted students, domestic violence victims, the homeless, people with severe mental illnesses, and individuals and families navigating the psychic awakening process. Since 2001, Crystal has been living her own advice about how to live with the psychic. When the full extent of Brett's psychic abilities exploded, practically overnight, she wasn't satisfied to just cope with the chaos. Instead, she tapped into her therapeutic background and intuition to figure out how people can turn this challenge into an opportunity for an even stronger relationship and an improved quality of life. Her book is How to Live with a Psychic, your guide for maintaining a happy relationship when someone you love gets weird. I love that title. And her website, where you can find out more about her and her work and the book, is crystalhoperead.com. Hi, Crystal.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, you're welcome. Welcome to my parlor, where I just dusted and watered the plants, so I hope you find it cozy here.
You're a very welcoming host.
Why, thank you. It probably right now feels a little bit like your home, and I'm sure you're cozy there. So what can I offer you to drink? That tends to be the first thing we ask here.
Do you have any iced tea?
I have been rocking the iced tea lately, so I have got some available right here.
That's great. Thank you.
I have a confession to make, and we talked about this a little bit behind the scenes. I don't even remember how I stumbled on your profile on Facebook, but I immediately contacted you after I saw that you were an animal communicator. And I wanted to have you on the show to talk about that, definitely. You know, I haven't really covered that too much yet. Then I heard you had a book, and I ignorantly assumed that your book was just, like one of the memoirs out there, like many books by psychics. And I thought, well, I've covered a lot of that, so we should definitely talk about being an animal communicator. But I have to say, until really digging into the book and researching for this episode, I didn't realize just what your book was about. And it's not just like every other book out there. It's completely fascinating. So, if we get to some pet psychic stuff, awesome. But I think a lot of people might find this book fascinating. And again, I'm talking about How to Live with a Psychic, your guide for maintaining a happy relationship when someone you love gets weird. And I had a lot of misconceptions, and the title should have cleared up that conception for me. But it apparently didn't hit me. So before I mess it up more, tell us a little bit about what your book is about.
Okay, well, when my husband's abilities started exploding, and it wasn't like he came from nowhere, but when they became really powerful and really sort of all-consuming with our life, I started looking on Amazon for books from the perspective of a person living with a psychic. There are, like you said, there's a ton of books out there about how to be psychic or from the psychic's perspective, but I found that there was actually no book on the topic of, well, okay, when your partner is seeming crazy to the rest of the world, how do you hold your life together? How do you make the best of it? And then I realized, well, I'm actually, with my counseling background and going through this personally, I'm sort of uniquely positioned to write a book on this subject. And so I got to work on that. And it incorporates relationship advice, which people are talking, like in reviews, they tell me that, oh, we're not even psychic, but this relationship advice is very helpful. So there's general relationship advice. There's information about how psychics perceive the world differently than non-psychics. And then there's actually also information, like if people are interested in starting their own little journey with it, since their partner is already underway, there's information on how to get started on different type of psychic skills. So there's actually a wide range of information in the book. And it is, like I said, it's the only book out there talking about the subject from this perspective right now.
Right. It's completely original, which is what I missed, and it should have hit me over the head when, you read the title. And we mentioned that you're an animal communicator. So you have some of these intuitive psychic abilities too. How common do you think it is for both spouses and the house to have these abilities or to be psychic?
Well, I mean, I have to say to begin with that I think everyone has the potential to be psychic. If it's latent or they're pushing it aside or whatever, I actually really think that we all are. So it's a question of, is it showing up? Is it rearing its head in your relationship and in its life? In terms of, do I think that is it common for both of the couple to have the abilities? Well, yes, I think when one starts to develop, the other one, their abilities sort of naturally kick in a little bit, and they can either run with that or they can suppress it, which a lot of people do because they're concerned maybe for religious teachings, or they don't want any changes to their lives because they like the way their life and their relationship is going right now. And this is a big change potentially, but I do think that one person sort of drags the other one along and opens up sort of on an energetic level. I talk in the book, actually, maybe this would help a little bit, about how we can become more psychic by being around psychics because our energy sort of entrains upward toward their energy if we allow that. So one partner being psychic will help the other one open up their skills if that second partner is willing to let that happen.
And what you told me too, and we should probably state this, is that even before you met Britt, your partner, you were getting into kind of some cool intuitive things and animal communication. And you've mentioned to me that Britt right now seems to kind of be I think you said the dominant psychic or something in the house. So can you kind of, explain that like you did to me? Because that cleared up a lot for me too.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't actually call him the dominant psychic because that's not a word that we would use, but I called us the major and minor psychics in the house.
That's what it was. Dominant is a little, a little demeaning. I apologize.
Yeah, that's okay. Okay, so my ability lies in, for example, like I said, animal communication, which is something I feel really strongly that everyone can do if they just open their mind to it. So, and then I can do a little bit of energy healing work. I can do a little bit of, say, if there's an entity in a space, sort of figuring out who that is a little bit. Whereas Brett, on the other hand, can clear entities from spaces, from people's auras, which we often call attachments. He can often even do this at a distance. He doesn't even have to be in the location, so he can do it astrally or whatever the proper word would be for that. But he can be here at home. And we've had him clear as far away as Florida recently, somebody's house. And so I consider him sort of more the major psychic, and I'm the minor psychic because his abilities seem stronger than mine right now, but we're both looking to grow all the time, to add new modalities and all of that. Did I answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yes, you did. And that sounds nothing but fun to me.
Our life is so awesome. I really have to say, this is not what we had planned, but just following the path that was laid out in front of us instead of rejecting it, which is a lot of the advice that I give in the book in various ways. Just go with it, and our life is just more incredible than we could have planned with our rational minds.
That's awesome. And I can't believe I said dominant. What a dork.
That's okay.
Oh, God. So what I did is a lot of my questions and things that popped up in my head to ask you about follow some of the common challenges that you list. I think it's probably in your first or second chapter or in the introduction. And so I'm going to go down some of those. And one of the some of the common challenges that you mentioned are increase in sensitivity, changes in sleep pattern, and then you mention illnesses. Can you go deeper into illnesses being a common challenge?
Okay, so part of being more psychic is often being more empathic. So one way that we get illnesses when we become more psychic until we learn how to protect ourselves is that we start to take on other people's stuff. And some people have this empathy their whole lives, and they have to, as they're growing up, figure it out, learn how to protect themselves. But for someone who is sort of closed off and now just becoming psychic, it can be that they're taking on stuff from the environment. So they can get sick that way. Also, stress-based illnesses, if what they're experiencing with their psychic ability is maybe feels negative to them, maybe the precognitive images they're having are of catastrophes and things like that. Or just maybe they are now a medium and they can see dead people walking around and that's stressing them out, which, it's understandable. They get stress-based illnesses. And then also, people just in general psychosomatize things. When we don't know how to handle a situation, it tends to show up in our bodies, right? That's a common thing, not just in this instance, but that's just a thing that humans do. So all these things can lead actually to people to get sort of really sick when this stuff comes crashing in on their life.
I think a lot of people don't really think about illnesses due to stress until later in life. I think when you're younger, you just ignore those things. And in my family, I'm seeing quite a bit of that in recent years, just, people needing to slow down and take more time for them and listen to your body.
Right.
You also talk about the common challenge of redirection of focus and interest. One of the things, and I'm quoting, one of the things in your book says, until it becomes integrated into their life, your partner might seem obsessed with the idea of the paranormal. And we like to encourage being paranerds here. And even though I'm not a psychic medium, my partner is not at all interested in these topics, which is kind of why I'm a little jealous of you guys being able to have fun with all of your psychic activities over there, the psychic party up in your house.
Right.
But, this is purely my own passion here. And I used to spend a lot of time feeling like a weirdo or being concerned about if he thinks I'm a crazy person. Mm-hmm. But we're now both fully aware and comfortable with each other's own nerdiness. And in that way, I feel like I can relate because I've certainly been obsessed with the idea of the paranormal in the last decade since I've kind of come into all of this. But seriously, for developing psychic, this can become a problem, huh?
Yes. If you think about, I don't know, when you met your partner, if you were already into the paranormal or if that was something that developed after you got together. But say a couple has been together 15 years and they have their routine, they have their shared interests and all of this kind of stuff. And then say maybe the wife all of a sudden starts being obsessed with the paranormal because now, like I said, now they can see and hear spirits, or every time they sleep, they wake up and they've had a precognitive dream. It can be kind of a obsessive or compulsive thing. And then that can take away from what the couple's used to doing with their shared time. And that's usually what the problem is. Or they're so obsessed with the paranormal, metaphysics, all of that, that they start slacking off maybe on other responsibilities around the house or something. All of these things have happened to me. That's why I can tell you about them. Everything I mentioned in the book has happened to us at least once. Some of it was more ongoing. Now things are a lot smoother because we've got our dynamic worked out and also he's got his stuff more under control. But things like, oh, wow, all of a sudden now he doesn't want to think about anything except this. He doesn't want to watch TV shows about anything except this. You know what I mean? It's like it's obsessive or compulsive, and the partner has to really learn to cope with that. And it does tend to taper off, I think, a little bit, but also the partner has to understand this is part of their life now. I mean, if you're in this partnership, this is part of your life, even if you're not into it. And you probably see that at your house too, right? Like,
I have some experience being the offender.
Sure, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's also kind of evened out a little bit. We've kind of adjusted because, you were talking about the timing of when we met and when this paranormal stuff started. And it was honestly about the same time. And so what I hear, I talk to a lot of people that are either psychic mediums or just really into the paranormal. And most of them I find grew up with it or have been fascinated with it all since childhood. And for me, it's all been a cram session for the last decade for the most part. And so for a while it was hot and heavy, just reading tons of books and learning about all of these topics. And, the OCD has slowed down a little bit. Now I've learned to just kind of have fun with it, and the podcast is a good outlet, and I don't have to necessarily breathe it every second of the day. One of the other common challenges you list is unexplainable things start to happen around the house. And I think a lot of people can relate to this, even if they don't claim to be psychic. And you say that sometimes home for you is sometimes Grand Central Station for entities and paranormal energy. Yes. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, because Brett, what we say is that because he's such a strong psychic, we think that he's bright or like a beacon in other dimensions. I don't think we've made this idea up. I think lots of other people describe it that way too. But because they realize that he's going to be able to see them, maybe even help them, because another thing he can do is help stuck spirits pass on if they're ready to go, that a lot of stuff is drawn to him. And we can tell that it's here partly because we're more perceptive now. Also, the dogs react. Also, things move or there are noises sometimes and all that. But it's sort of always around. And what's happened actually that's kind of funny is that sometimes, it's like, okay, there's just too much, and he'll clear the house out. And he's all about compassion. So he's not, I don't know how to say it, but he's like not hurting anyone, but you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, right? So it's like everybody has to leave. And then the house will be really empty, and it seems as if like that's unsatisfying to him in a way. It's like he feels like there's something missing when there are actually no spirits around or anything. So
like the party stopped.
yeah. Or it's not being able to have air or not being able to have one of your senses functioning. To him, it's almost like one of his senses is cut off. If we really seal the house up really well and nobody can come in. So, we have lots of stuff. Every night we see things. Every night we're getting, touches on the face or the arm or whatever. Occasionally the dogs react, but our dogs, man, we have 3 little dogs and they are troopers. In the beginning, they used to be really nervous, but now they just, unless someone's actually like touching them, or in their face, they don't even react to things. They're really amazing. But yeah, that's what it's like to live with him. And I don't know that it's like that to live with every medium, every energy healer, because there's so many different ways that psychic ability can go. But with someone like Brett, you're always going to have spirits and other things, I will say, around. You just have to get used to that. Or I guess you either get used to it or you opt out of the relationship. That's sort of your 2 options there.
So for those people who aren't going to opt out, which is nice of him,
right.
Do you have any other specific tips for them on kind of getting used to that?
Well, I remember that for me, because this was all new to me, and come to find out, Brett, in retrospect, we see how a lot of things have happened throughout his life, not with such intensity, but things that point to this sort of building up, ever since his early childhood. For me, since all of this was new, because I didn't even really believe in like ghosts and everything growing up. I mentioned that in the book. Like, I think all of this is just complete nonsense and people are fooling themselves or whatever. So I've come a really long way.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was scary to me at first. That was the problem. The thing for me wasn't so much that he's spending all of his free time watching these shows and all that. That wasn't where the challenge was for me. It was that I was actually really scared by, my gosh, now I'm seeing things. Now things are moving. Whatever that was scary to me. So what I had to remember was that those things aren't hurting me. The fact that I see something moving around, that is not hurting me. The vast majority of what's out there can't hurt me. So that's really where I had to get over that. So remembering that, I think, is maybe the number one key in terms of this little subsection we're talking about of like things start happening around the house. Remember that it's different but it's not going to hurt you.
I think a lot of people freak out when, a lot of people talk about paranormal activity and they jump to demonic, and
Sure.
a lot of people have misconceptions probably of poltergeist type things. And I think when people just take a step back and chill and realize that it's just energy. And, like when people have criticized me or anyone else for doing any kind of divination or spirit communication, and they're like, oh, da, da. And you're like, but for me, it's not that. It's very interesting, and the energy is fine, and it's not negative. And so I think people need to get the movies out of their head.
Yeah.
And just, realize that it's probably nothing's going to reach out and grab you. Although in your case, you have had somebody reach out and grab you.
I did. Yeah. I mean, we're trying to tell people they shouldn't be scared, right?
Perfect timing.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll explain how that is, right? So I was terrified in the moment. I'm just putting a preamble on this. I was terrified in the moment because it was so new. I think now if that same experience that I'm going to explain right now happened to me, it would have just been more of something that I commented on, and I wouldn't have been so afraid. So it is really about, realizing that it's not going to hurt you. So what Patrick's talking about is many years ago, we were in a hotel on Fremont Street in Las Vegas, the hotel where they do the seances for Houdini every year, if you happen to know which one that is.
Oh, yeah.
And and I was choked by a ghost. Now, it wasn't choking like I couldn't breathe or that I was in pain. It wasn't like that, but I distinctly felt something around my neck, and I felt the energy of hostility pushing down on top of me. And that scared me so badly that I made him not only, it was like 2:30, but it's Vegas, so everything's open. I made him not only get a different room, we had to go to a different hotel and all that because I couldn't handle it. So things can touch you. And like I said, we get touched every night. It feels like a little, like with a feather or a spider web or something,
Yeah.
But still, that's not hurting us. That's not having an adverse effect on us. Yeah, so that can happen. I've had, when we've done, what we used to do, we don't do this so much anymore, is go on those ghost hunts where you do a lockdown, a lock-in overnight, whatever.
Yeah, or like a ghost tour. Sometimes they do those activities.
Yeah. And so we used to do that quite a bit more. Now it's funny, we don't really need to because everybody comes home with us. But, but yeah, I had one where it felt like someone was pulling on my leg. Like it could have, I have no idea who it was, but it could have been a small child, like a small child holds on to a mom's leg, And I felt like that kind of sensation, as if there was a weight of something around my leg trying to pull my leg down. That was in a old abandoned jail in East LA. So it's not that they can't touch you, but they're not hurting you. And I appreciate that it can be scary, but that's the main thing for people to get over. And you mentioned about demons and things like that. I didn't used to believe in that. I do now. But I think that people, like you said, are real quick to attribute anything that feels scary or negative to that, when a lot of times it's just a ghost, right? It's just a person who hasn't passed all the way on yet for whatever reason, and they want your attention. They're pretty much invisible. And so if they realize that you can recognize them in any way, you see them, you hear them, they make a noise on something and you look over there, I mean, they're just desperate for attention. So that's a lot of what's going on. And once people realize that, I think that it's easier to be less afraid.
Hearing you talk about that experience at the hotel very much reminds me of, I only have a few major paranormal experiences really in my lifetime. And I've talked several times about the hand that reached out and grabbed me one night when I was in bed. And this was in a week where I was involved in 2 seance experiments that I'd organized. And also an investigation. I was helping a family with some things going on in their home, which I don't do often anymore. And I had woken up and was cold and had that kind of racing heart experience. And I remember immediately thinking, this is weird and somebody's here with me. And that doesn't happen to me, and I was on my left side on, the right side of the bed. My partner's on the left. Well, I'm turned on my left side when this is happening. And suddenly I think intuitively I was picturing the color of this hand, but it was definitely a cold, solid, black hand that grabbed me on my shoulder and kind of pulled me back on my back, and it retreated under the bed. And I don't get too afraid of things. Well, I was I was afraid of that, and I didn't check for it, and I didn't get out of bed, and I just stayed there. I did get my phone out and push record on my phone, and I'm like, I don't want to wake up anybody else in the house either. My parents were actually guests that night too, and so that was weird. And so I'm whispering, going, "Hello, is anybody here?" And what made me think of this was because, that was in the middle of the night, and, you were probably also sleeping too. And so my mind goes back and forth on, was I fully awake? Does it matter if I wasn't fully awake? I'm pretty darn sure that I was awake. And so that I will never, ever forget that moment, but I'm also confused about what that moment was. So one of the cool things that you suggest in the book for spouses maybe learning to deal with one of the spouses talking to people that you can't see is learning sign language or some kind of shorthand so that both of you know what's going on without having to say it aloud. I thought that was interesting. Can you go into a little bit of that?
Sure. We decided that we needed ways to let the other know if we were in, say, a crowded room or a place where it wasn't appropriate to be talking about paranormal stuff, what was going on. And so we developed a series of hand signals that are, not as obvious as like the baseball signals and all that kind of thing. But they're really subtle. And in fact, we do sometimes use them in front of, say, like his family or anybody else to let each other know what's going on, and nobody seems any the wiser. So, and we also have, in that same section, I talk about coming up sort of with your own lexicon. That I think just happens naturally with couples, right? You have your pet names for your favorite restaurants, for example, and all that kind of stuff. So you just use that same theory to develop your language so you can be talking about it without explicitly talking about it in a way that other people even understand what you're saying. And it's not only useful to have a shorthand so you don't have to, explain things from the beginning every time one word or a phrase can mean a whole experience, but it's also fun to have that secret in front of other people. I mean, I really do enjoy being in front of, like I said, family or a group of other people, and we're having a conversation about all the spirits hanging out in the corner, for example, and nobody knows we're talking about that. So like that's just kind of a little fun bonding thing even, like a way to make it fun for both partners to be in on this together.
I'm trying to think of a scenario that I could ask you about, but like, is there what would be a symbol, and maybe this is secret, maybe it's not for sharing, but what would be like a symbol of when you're in a group and maybe the energy is just too much or it's just too much to handle in the moment? What is the symbol for like, we got to peace out of here. We can't do this right now.
Okay, so you actually chose a poor example.
Oh. Okay.
Only because that's a thing that people know us well enough that we would just say aloud. Oh,
okay.
We have to go, like, the energy's a little overwhelming in here. But just for argument's sake, what could other people do? It's whatever they would do. Say, like, people go to parties and they're like, okay, I only want to be here half an hour. And if your coworker that I hate gets in my face, like, we need to leave, and then they have like a little symbol, like rubbing their nose or pulling on their ear, or, twirling their hair or something like that. It's like that. It doesn't have to be anything that literally means anything. It's just what you agree on.
Is there an actual symbol that does apply to what you guys would do that you want to share?
Oh, let's see. We try to keep that sort of secret because
that's what I was wondering.
But I will tell you that a lot of them are just what we do with one hand. Positions or movements we do with just one hand that might just look like we're fidgeting to someone else, but to the other person it means something.
So it is kind of like baseball hand signals.
It is, but we try to be, yeah.
That's awesome. I love like that.
In our forehead and yes, spinning our heads around and stuff. Yeah.
It makes me wonder how many other people have this secret language with hand symbols that they use in these cases.
And not just these cases, but I'm pretty sure that this is not like an uncommon thing for couples to do. They have their little thing where they're like I said, like, I want to leave a party, or this person is pissing me off. I don't know if I can say that on your podcast.
Go for it.
It's like, I need you to come over and save me from this situation or whatever. I think couples sort of automatically do that. So I just recommend to use it in this instance too. It's great for communication. It's also, like I said, it's fun and a good bonding mechanism for the two of you to have sort of like this secret you against the world. Yeah.
There's a topic that you cover quite a bit in your book that I think is kind of taboo probably in this community. And, your book promises to teach the reader how to differentiate between psychic and psychotic. So, tell us a little about how to differentiate between that, and how does that conversation come up, or is it even a conversation that comes up?
If you mean a conversation that comes up between the two partners, I don't know that that's a conversation that really comes up. It's really more the thought process of the other partner who is looking at their spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, and saying, well, people who are schizophrenic talk to people that I can't see, and now they're talking to people that I can't see. How do I know that they're not schizophrenic? And as there's always the disclaimer and everything. Anything in the book, anything I say is not, it's not a substitute for getting checked out or whatever. Mm-hmm. Obviously, medical, psychiatric, if you're concerned, then you should get checked out. Although, having a mental illness on your record is considered a pre-existing condition, by the way. So I'll just say that for whatever that might mean to people. But generally, people who are schizophrenic, you can see that, and this is from my experience working in the mental health field, that what they're receiving is very disturbing to them. It's all often negative messages. It's often messages about hurting themselves or being destructive towards themselves or others. You, I'm sure, are familiar with being a mandated reporter, right? Danger to self or others, right? Mm-hmm. These are the things we have to tell people about. But the vast majority of people who are claiming, no, really, I'm talking to my spirit guides, or no, it's your Aunt Edna or whatever, they're getting loving, positive messages. This is really inconsistent with what happens to a schizophrenic person, first of all. And then secondly, part of the way you can tell is if there's any kind of corroboration at all. If they're claiming there are spirits around and then all of a sudden things are moving in the house, well, I mean, that's pretty good evidence that they're probably telling the truth. But mainly, I guess, the short version is this: is it positive or is it negative? And, even if you are psychic, you could be getting a lot of negative messages, I have to say.
Right.
Messed up spirits just trying to get a rise out of you, for example, or something like that. Or maybe your skill is precognition and what you see is a lot of catastrophes and then they happen later, and so that's really disturbing or whatever. But for the most part, it's not going to have, it's just working in the mental health field, I guess it's a little easier because it's what's called the flavor. What is the flavor of their visions or their hallucinations, which are the same thing depending on whether they're psychic or schizophrenic. But yeah, what is the flavor of that? And if it's not negative, if it's not pointing to danger to self or others, then it's most likely not a mental disorder. And also, you have, even if you're not sure, if everything that's coming through is positive, that gives you a little leeway to be like, well, nothing negative is coming of this anyway, so that gives me a little bit more time to evaluate what's really going on. Part of what I mean by the flavor of visions or hallucinations is that people with psychotic disorders often have what's called delusions of reference. And this is a thing that doesn't show up so much people with their psychic ability. Delusions of reference are when someone feels like everything that's happening around them is for their benefit specifically, like people who think that not just that there are government conspiracies, but the governments have conspiracies directly against them. For example, I know a young man who suffers from psychotic breaks, and he thinks in those moments that the cars that are parked on his street are parked in a certain order because the government is trying to give him a message based on the color of those cars. So this isn't something you would normally see in someone who's psychic. For example, if they're a medium and they're getting messages from spirits, it's not going to be messages just all about themselves. They're going to be talking to spirits at least part of the time who are trying to get them to pass on a message to one of their loved ones. So it's not always going to be self-referential, and that is actually a big determining factor between the psychic versus psychotic. So I guess the main points are that if there's danger to self or others present, regardless of the reason, you always want to get someone else involved for their own safety and safety of others. But also this point of delusions of reference, or are all the messages self-referential? Are all the images self-referential? This could also point to it maybe being a mental disorder instead of growing psychic ability. So that would probably, those two elements are the main determiners for me.
It would be it's a tough thing, I guess, to figure out. And, it's things you can't see.
Right. I mean, I actually wonder, we have a large homeless population here in Los Angeles, of course, maybe like the largest in the US or whatever, per capita. And you see people walking down the street all the time arguing with someone. And now most people would say they're arguing with no one, but I don't know. I don't know that they're not arguing with some jerk spirit who gets off on like harassing this person because they know that they can see them. And so I don't know.
And they would probably be an easy target for that.
Exactly.
So we also have to point out that, obviously one of the pointers you have, or one of the notes you have in your book, is the importance of being open to understanding and listening, and just importance of being open to what could be going on and the abilities.
In terms of what's happening with the other person?
Yes.
Absolutely. That solves so much of the relationship strife even that comes from this for some couples. Just being open-minded and accepting. And I don't think in any way that it's an illness, but I mean, if someone was experiencing something else, like they lost a job or got a new job, even if it's a positive thing, or they're pregnant and it's their first time being pregnant, they don't know what to do. Like, we know how to give those people room to learn how to function in this new way, right? Because these are common things that happen in our culture or just in our human experience. And so we kind of have to take that same approach with this, because I can tell you from experience, sometimes Brett would say things in the beginning, and then later on he'd have a different opinion about what had happened in the beginning. And so I have to give him leeway that he's learning about this too, and we support our loved ones through many different changes in their lives. And this can be considered actually just like that if the partner is open-minded enough to let it just be another growth spurt.
Now, one thing that I find in my circles, when you have a podcast and you get into this, you become friends with a lot of people with abilities and psychic mediums, and a lot of times they end up working on developing a career in being a psychic or a medium, and sometimes it's just kind of a hobby. And one of the things that you suggest is getting clear about the lifestyle of modern day mystics, and, realizing that if you really start to follow these gifts, that paying bills is still necessary, which is another thing that you talk
Yes.
about in the book. And so I think there are probably a lot of people listening right now that are going through this in their head. Do I make this a career? Is it necessary for me to make this a career? And how can I, if I'm going to?
Sure. Well, I think almost any line of work, when you're trying to, say, start your own business, which in a very unromantic way, that's what we would be discussing, right? Is becoming self-employed as a psychic.
Yeah.
So you're starting a business. And so it's recommended, just in any entrepreneur training, that you work under other people or you study from other people, and that you maybe don't give up your day job until, the side gig is lucrative enough to pay your bills. So that's actually how I would suggest going about it. Yeah, I mean, that's exceptionally pragmatic. I don't know if that's the kind of answer people want to hear, but it really would be just like starting your own business. So pursue it like that. There's also lots of opportunity if you don't want to give up what you do as a career. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with your abilities just to help people on a pro bono basis. And I assure you, there are literally millions of people out there who would love you to just use your psychic skills for them and not have to pay you. And I think the same goes for like artists and musicians and things that people consider quasi careers, right? And in terms of the lifestyle, yeah, I mean, the examples I use in the book is like the old image of like, the guru sitting up in a cave, or there was some Eddie Murphy movie, I can't remember what it was now, but he walked around in white robes and barefoot, and he just wandered around. But that's not the reality. I mean, the reality is that there are so many people out there with psychic abilities now, and more people than anyone would ever imagine are having paranormal experiences. They're developing their psychic abilities, but they're still going to their jobs. They're still an accountant or a teacher or whatever, and then this is just some added thing that's happening in their life. And that's what it is for most people. Most people don't make a career out of it. It's just this like extra skill or talent that they have. Some people are prodigal on the piano, or they're fantastic singers. And then, some people have psychic ability. And that's sort of how you chalk it up in most people's lives. But in making a career out of it, I feel like that's actually sort of difficult. I don't want to be discouraging to anyone, but I feel like it's like being a professional athlete or something, to the extent of the percentage of people who have these abilities to those who make like a really big career out of it. It's a very small percentage of people from what I've seen.
Yeah, it's the reality that I tend to see too. You want to be excited and encourage people, but it's going to be hard,
Yeah.
And you say in your book, the new standard is to incorporate metaphysical work into an otherwise normal life.
And what do you think about that? I mean, that's obviously my opinion, but does that make sense to you?
I would relate it to what I'm doing now as a podcast nerd.
Yes.
I'm not
right.
there certainly are podcasters that have made this their career, but, I don't think it's at all the norm. There are going to be people that make some money kind of on it, but I would certainly not give up teacher retirement right now at this stage.
Exactly.
To pursue something that is not, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I would love to, trust me. But I think, and that's what I think about when I'm talking to some of my friends who are out on this journey of making it a career. And I'm like, man, that would be so fun to just do this all the time. But, paying bills is still necessary. That's one of the things you say in the book.
Yeah. And I suppose if you have a partner or a trust fund or something that can, just sponsor your life, then a lot more of us would be doing that. But that's not the reality, right? That's not the reality that we live in our culture. So
So before our conversation today, about a couple hours before, I actually dropped a little hint about this topic that we've been talking about in the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook, which is our, group of paranerds on Facebook and listeners. And I just I didn't even mention your name or the book or anything yet. And I just kind of dropped the topic in there. And Lana and John, two of our favorite paranerds, say, and I don't know that this necessarily has to be a question directly to you, but we can just talk about the topic. And they ask, do you ever use your abilities while in or to avoid an argument?
Oh.
And I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting.
Does that ever happen? Or maybe you don't want to say anything about that.
No. Yeah, that'd be no problem. Brett would get a kick out of this topic, actually. No, I don't use any of our abilities to stay out of an argument. I use my counseling background to stay out of an argument. That would be my personal strategy there. But I don't know. So we can discuss it. Do you have any experience with that?
Are you asking me or are you asking Brett?
No, Brett's not in the room.
Oh, okay.
Him. That would be a different show, right? No, we do have, the answer is just no, like, as I said, but having a counseling background definitely helps. And also, we are so like-minded, we don't argue that much anyway.
That's awesome.
And one thing that happens, though, is what I call thought sharing. And this isn't usually related to arguments, but it's usually positive or neutral information. So one of us will have a thought about something seemingly random, and then the other one will mention it within 10, 15 seconds or something like that. And we might just be lying in bed. So it's not like either of us were watching TV and saw Harambe, the gorilla that got shot, but all of a sudden both of us are thinking of it at the same time. And then, we joke about who thought of it first. And so we have like a little joking argument about who gets credit for thinking of that first. But we have like quite a bit of thought sharing like that. So I'm not conscious of any kind of way that that's played into an argument, but now I'm going to pay attention, actually.
Well, and it's interesting from what you just said. The next comment that was in that thread in the Facebook group was from Ashley Riley, who was our previous guest, and she's an intuitive. And she said, mostly I just plan subconscious suggestions to take out the trash, make something specific for dinner, etc.
Yes, exactly.
So that's what you're talking about. That's awesome.
Yeah. That's great.
Well, I do have to say, we don't even need to, we just need to have you on again sometime about animal communication, because I'm sure that could definitely be more than one episode in itself. But if people are interested in your work with animal communication, they should definitely visit your website, because there's lots of stuff on there, and that's crystalhopereed.com, and that link will be in the show notes. And again, the book is How to Live with a Psychic, your guide for maintaining a happy relationship when someone you love gets weird. And is there anything else that I'm forgetting that we should bring up? Is there anything you wanted to leave us with?
I guess just my message to everyone, whether we're talking about animal communication or this or anything, is I feel so passionately about the idea that everyone has psychic ability in them, and you just really have to open yourself up to that, and it makes life so much richer. And so even though my book is about, there's one psychic partner and one non-psychic partner, I don't really believe in that distinction per se. It's just that one is experiencing it, the other one hasn't opened up to it yet. So that's just a message I put out. Even when I talk about animal communication stuff to people, everyone can do this. This is like our birthright. We're just opening up to this now. So I hope everyone tries to pursue it in whatever way is comfortable or interesting to them.
This has been an awesome conversation. I've very much enjoyed it. Where can people find you other than your website? Are you out there in the world of the internet? Where do you suggest people to look for you?
Well, I'm on Facebook. You just look for Crystal Hope Reed on Facebook, and Animal Psychic on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter as much. But I'm really quick on emails. If people ever want to email me and just ask something or whatever, really quick to respond. And I don't have any appearances scheduled at this moment that I could pitch right now, but or plug, I should say. But yeah, just send me an email if you have any questions.
Awesome. You rock. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you, Patrick. It was really nice talking to you.
You're listening to the Big Seance podcast with Patrick Keller. Look for us on iTunes and be sure to check out bigseance.com for more discussion.
Well, the time has come for Tim Prossel to share his final Spectral Edition with us. It's his last because I think we've gone through all of the stories in his collections. Some of you may be aware that Tim produced the audio versions of Spectral Edition in 4 collections. Series 3 was featured on a podcast produced by some Paranerd friends of ours over at History Goes Bump. So if you're caught up with all of the Spectral Editions that Tim has shared here, you can simply visit his site where he has every series in one place. And Series 3 is the one you'll want to catch up with, unless, of course, you're a listener of History Goes Bump. If that's the case, you may have heard them all. But as always, I'll link you to Tim's site, The Merry Ghost Hunter, in the show notes, which you can get to in whatever podcast app you're using, or by going to bigseance.com. Tim has promised to make another appearance as a guest on the show at some point. So do me a favor, please. Do you have a favorite Spectral Edition from the show? Do you just have a question for Tim? Send it to me. I'll be collecting them all for that future episode. I also wanted to mention 2 books that Tim has in the works. A Spectral Edition book, which I'm super excited about, and another Vera Van Slyke novel. You may remember us discussing Mr. Prossel's first Vera Van Slyke book in his first guest appearance way back on episode 22 from November 25th, 2014. And again, you can stay in touch with Tim Prossel through his site, The Merry Ghost Hunter, which you can find at merryghosthunter.wordpress.com. Here we go. The final Spectral Edition. This one titled Ghosts Known and Unknown.
Welcome to Spectral Edition. I'm Tim Prossel. You know, when I started collecting these ghost reports, I had no idea that I would find hundreds of them. And once I realized that, I had to start to categorize them and put them into separate folders, such as haunted people or haunted roads and haunted houses. The folder with haunted houses started to get very, very large, so I had to subdivide that some way. And what I came up with are articles that provide some kind of background for the ghost, a backstory, with at least speculation on who the ghost was in life. And then the other folder was for those articles where we don't know anything about the ghost. Let me give you an example of the first kind. This is where we know something about the ghost. And this is from the Lancaster Daily Intelligencer. It's a newspaper from Pennsylvania. It came out on November 19th of 1880. The headline reads, "A Haunted House. A Dead Miser's Uneasy Spirit Revisiting His Earthly Dwelling." In the village of Greenville, on a lonely road in the suburbs of Cleveland, is a frame house of 1.5 stories, about which there is at present considerable excitement among the neighboring residents on account of some singular manifestations that occur therein. The family living there have become disgusted with its peculiar attributes and are about to leave. Frequently, and at all hours during the daytime as well as after dark, the most singular sounds can be heard in different rooms in the house, knocks being given so loudly as to frighten people living in the brick mansion many rods away. Watches have been frequently kept to discover if someone was not practicing a fraud, but the investigators have invariably decided that the house is supernaturally haunted. An old miser who formerly lived there and who bore a bad reputation in other ways beside the hoarding of money is said to be continually walking and pounding about the premises in order to bring to light a large sum of gold which disappeared mysteriously about the time of his death. Now, here's an example of the other kind of haunted house ghost report, the one where we don't know anything about the ghost, and I actually find this one much creepier. This is from the Weekly Panola Star from Mississippi. It was published on May 10th of 1869. The headline is, A Haunted House. A curious story is going the rounds of the press concerning a haunted house in Penyon, New York. A visitor thus describes what he saw and heard. Our village clock was striking the hour of 12 when we entered the haunted room. The stillness was disturbed first by what seemed a guitar, played but a few feet from us, and as sweet a voice as ear ever heard, singing to it in a low tone. In an instant the sound of voices and footsteps were heard all about us, but although the room was lighted as a lamp could make it, we saw nothing. The singing continued until the same sweet voice, in the most piercing and sharpest utterance, cried, "Help!" As the unearthly yell broke forth, we felt our hearts beat quickly, our breath come heavily, and every nerve tingle. 3 times did this mysterious voice cry, "Help!" After this followed what seemed to be a dance of madmen, together with the most demonic screams ever heard. As I say, I find that story a lot creepier than the miser looking for his treasure. That first one has sort of a fairy tale feel to it, but this second one is... Oof. I'm Tim Prossel. You've been listening to Spectral Edition. I have more than 300 of these ghost reports, and I publish one each Wednesday on my website, The Merry Ghost Hunter. You can also find previously released audio versions of Spectral Edition there, too. Once again, the name of the website, The Merry Ghost Hunter, Merry. I hope you stop by.
Thanks for joining us for the Big Seance podcast. We'd better get back to the table while there's still some candlelight left.
I want to thank Miss Amber for the very kind and sweet feedback that you heard at the beginning of the show. Amber, it's about time we heard your voice. Last week, I heard from Kristen, who recently found the show, and she's been binging episodes. So she said after listening to last year's Halloween episode with Karen A. Dahlman, she just purchased a Ouija board. So I can't wait to hear how that goes. Keep us posted, Kristen. And I heard from Patrick, who subbed for me once in my classroom, actually, small world. He's been listening in, and now he's gearing up to produce his very own podcast. And I actually owe you an email, Patrick. And so hopefully by the time you hear this, I've sent that already. Well, that's what I have for you this week, folks. I hope you're having a great summer. I also hope to see some of you very soon at the Haunted America Conference in Alton, Illinois. I've heard from a few of you that you'll be attending, so let me know if you haven't. And just like last year, I plan on being the nerd who floats around with a microphone, catching some cool conversations for you. Will you please consider sharing this episode with someone who just may appreciate it? You know, a special paranerd who just might enjoy our content. And it really helps us spread the word when you subscribe in Apple Podcasts, which, by the way, is what they're calling the home of podcasts on iTunes now. So that's what Apple Podcasts is. If you've been listening through iTunes, it's the same thing. Or subscribe on whatever podcast app you use. So maybe you can get that friend to subscribe as well. You guys rock. See ya. For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. Just click on the Big Seance podcast logo or find it in the menu. You can also find and subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, and iHeartRadio.
Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line, 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to bigseance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.
What you told me too, and we should probably state this, is that even before you met Britt, your partner, I'm going to start that over because I almost choked to death. Well, I definitely I have even more questions that I could ask, but I want to get to some questions that I dropped in, okay, I'm going to start all over because